If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Sharing it with your friends and family helps spread knowledge. And when we help others grow, we grow too. Thank you so much for listening. Let's dive into the podcast. The Earth Summit and the Birth of Agenda 21, 1992. The year was 1992, and something strange was happening in the halls of power. World leaders were whispering about a new kind of problem, one that crossed every border and threatened every nation equally. In Rio de Janeiro, over 100 heads of state gathered for what would become the largest environmental conference in history. The air buzzed with urgency. Climate scientists had been sounding alarms for years, but now their warnings reached the highest levels of government. Behind closed doors, negotiations grew intense. Countries that rarely agreed on anything suddenly found themselves debating a shared future. The Amazon rainforest stretched beyond the conference windows, a living reminder of what hung in the balance. Maurice Strong, the conference Secretary General, moved between delegations like a chess master. His vision was bold and unsettling, a global plan that would reshape how humanity lived on Earth. Some called him a visionary. Others whispered he was orchestrating something far more dangerous. The document that emerged contained 40 chapters and over 300 pages. They called it Agenda 21. On the surface, it read like a handbook for saving the planet. Dig deeper, and questions multiplied like shadows at twilight. Chapter after chapter outlined new ways to manage forests, cities, and even how people should live their daily lives. The language seemed innocent enough. Sustainable development, environmental protection, poverty reduction. But critics noticed something else buried in the text. The plan suggested monitoring systems that would track resource use in every community. It proposed new forms of governance that blended local, national, and international authority. Traditional property rights would be reconsidered through an environmental lens. President George H.W. Bush signed the agreement. But his words carried weight beyond ceremony. He insisted that American sovereignty would never be compromised. His caution hinted at deeper concerns about what they were really agreeing to. Local officials across America began receiving thick binders filled with implementation guidelines. Small towns suddenly found themselves discussing global policies in their council meetings. Federal grants came with strings attached. Money flowed to communities that embraced the new sustainable development models. By 1993, President Clinton established the President's Council on Sustainable Development. The machine was in motion, transforming a Rio conference room agreement into American policy. Some communities welcomed the change. Others noticed that their traditional ways of making decisions were slowly being replaced by processes that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. What had started as an environmental summit was becoming something much larger, a quiet revolution in how the world would be governed. Local implementation and emerging resistance, 1997 to 2002. The late 1990s brought a curious shift. What started as environmental planning sessions in small town halls across America soon sparked heated debates that would echo for decades. In Boulder, Colorado, city planners gathered residents to discuss bike paths and green spaces. The meeting seemed ordinary enough. But when officials mentioned following United Nations guidelines, something changed in the room. Voices grew louder. Questions became accusations. Similar scenes played out from Maine to California. Local governments proudly announced their commitment to sustainable development. They spoke of cleaner air, better transportation, and preserved natural areas. Citizens nodded along until someone mentioned Agenda 21. The name itself became a trigger. Property owners worried about land use restrictions. Farmers feared new regulations. Business leaders questioned foreign influence on local decisions. What began as discussions about recycling programs transformed into debates about American sovereignty. Tom Henderson, a rancher from Montana, attended his first city council meeting in 1998. He left convinced that international forces wanted to control his family's land. His story spread through local radio shows and community newsletters. Other ranchers shared similar concerns. The internet amplified these fears. Websites appeared overnight, connecting worried citizens across state lines. They shared documents, meeting recordings, and personal experiences. Forums buzzed with theories about hidden agendas and secret plans. Meanwhile, European towns faced different challenges. In rural England, farmers protested new environmental standards. German communities questioned Brussels-based regulations. The pattern repeated across continents. But each location added its own cultural flavor to the resistance. Media coverage split dramatically. Environmental magazines praised local initiatives as necessary progress. Conservative publications warned of creeping globalism. Mainstream newspapers struggled to explain the growing divide. City planners found themselves caught in the middle. They had embraced what seemed like common-sense environmental policies. Suddenly, they faced packed meeting rooms filled with angry citizens demanding answers about international conspiracies. The resistance wasn't just emotional. Legal challenges emerged. Property rights groups filed lawsuits. State legislators introduced bills to block UN-influenced policies. The battle moved from meeting rooms to courthouses. By 2002, a strange transformation had occurred. Environmental sustainability programs now carried political weight far beyond their original scope. The simple goal of cleaner communities had become entangled with deep questions about freedom, sovereignty, and trust in government. Local officials who once focused on park maintenance and waste management suddenly found themselves defending against accusations of participating in global plots. The seeds of a much larger controversy had been planted in the most unlikely place, small-town America's civic meetings. From sustainability to surveillance, Agenda 2030 takes shape. 2012 to 2015. Something changed in 2015. The whispers grew louder in the halls of the United Nations building in New York. Delegates from 193 nations gathered for what they called a historic moment. But was it progress or something more calculated? Agenda 21 had quietly worked in the background for 23 years. Now it was time for an upgrade. The world leaders needed something bigger. Something with numbers that could be measured. Something with deadlines that could not be ignored. They called it Agenda 2030. The new plan arrived with 17 goals. Clean water for everyone. No more hunger. Good schools in every corner of the earth. On paper, it sounded like paradise. The goals covered everything from climate change to gender equality. Each goal came with specific targets. Each target came with precise measurements. But here's where it gets interesting. Unlike the vague promises of 1992, this new agenda demanded data. Lots of it. How many people had clean water? How much carbon did each country produce? How many women held leadership positions? The questions seemed endless. Digital tracking systems emerged almost overnight. Satellites monitored forests from space. Smart sensors measured air quality in real time. Mobile apps collected information about people's daily habits, all in the name of saving the planet. Critics started asking uncomfortable questions. Why did environmental protection require so much personal data? Why did fighting poverty need detailed records of where people lived and worked? Why did gender equality programs want to track individual behavior patterns? The answers came wrapped in scientific language and good intentions. Data helps us help you better. Monitoring creates accountability. Tracking prevents waste. Every explanation made perfect sense on the surface. Yet something felt different about this new approach. The old Agenda 21 had been abstract. People could ignore it if they wanted. Agenda 2030 was concrete. It had numbers. It had deadlines. It had consequences for countries that fell behind. Technology companies eagerly joined the mission. They offered to build the systems. They volunteered to store the information. They promised to make everything more efficient. The same companies that had been collecting private data for years suddenly became partners in saving humanity. By 2015, a strange alliance had formed. Environmental activists worked alongside tech giants. Government officials partnered with data collectors. Everyone agreed on the goals. Few questioned the methods. The machinery was in place. The goals were set. The countdown to 2030 had begun. But as the digital nets spread wider, some people wondered if they were being saved or slowly surrounded. The Great Reset. A new vision unveiled. 2020. The world stood still in June 2020. Cities emptied. Economies crumbled. Fear gripped every nation as the pandemic spread like wildfire across the globe. Then, from the heart of Switzerland, came a voice with a bold promise. Klaus Schwab, the man behind the World Economic Forum, stepped forward with what he called the Great Reset. His timing seemed perfect. Or perhaps too perfect. Schwab spoke of rebuilding everything, not just fixing what broke during the crisis, but creating something entirely new. He painted pictures of fairer markets, cleaner energy, and technology that would solve humanity's greatest problems. His words carried weight because world leaders listened. Prince Charles endorsed the plan immediately. The head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, praised it publicly. Corporate giants lined up to support this vision of tomorrow. The message was clear. The old world had failed, and they had the blueprint for a better one. But what exactly was this blueprint? The official documents spoke of three main goals. First, they wanted to steer markets toward fairer outcomes. Second, they promised economic recovery that would benefit everyone equally. Third, they planned to use advanced technology to transform society itself. The language sounded noble. Who could argue against fairness and sustainability? Yet beneath these pleasant words lay something that made people uneasy. The scope was massive. Every aspect of human life seemed included in their vision. Critics noticed how the pandemic had created the perfect conditions for such radical change. People were scared, isolated, and willing to accept new rules if they promised safety. The timing felt calculated rather than coincidental. The Great Reset borrowed heavily from earlier global initiatives. Agenda 21 from the 1990s had promised sustainable development. Agenda 2030 expanded those goals even further. Now, the Great Reset took these ideas and supercharged them with crisis-driven urgency. Schwab wrote about the Fourth Industrial Revolution as if it were inevitable. He described a world where artificial intelligence would reshape work, where digital systems would monitor everything, where traditional ownership might become obsolete. His book painted this future as progress, but many read it as control. The more officials explained the Great Reset, the more questions arose. Who would decide what counted as fair? Which leaders would control these new systems? How much freedom would people surrender for promised security? What started as a response to crisis began looking like something much larger. A plan that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge from the shadows. The reset had begun, but nobody knew where it would end. The Convergence of Crises and Ideologies, 2021 to 2022. The World Economic Forum's annual gatherings had always drawn attention, but 2021 brought something different. Behind closed doors in Davos, world leaders spoke of reshaping entire economic systems. Their words, broadcast live to millions, carried weight that few anticipated. Klaus Schwab, stood at the podium, his voice steady as he described a world transformed. "We must build back better," he declared. The cameras captured every gesture, every pause. Within hours, these moments would spark conversations in living rooms across the globe. But the message meant different things to different people. Corporate executives nodded in agreement, seeing opportunity in crisis. Environmental activists heard hope for climate action. Yet in small towns and online forums, a darker interpretation began to take shape. Social media platforms buzzed with questions. Why were the world's most powerful people meeting in secret? What did Build Back Better really mean? The BBC reported on growing public unease, documenting how ordinary citizens struggled to understand the forum's true intentions. The reset's ambitious scope became its vulnerability. When leaders spoke of transforming healthcare, education, and finance simultaneously, their grand vision sounded ominous to many ears. People who had never heard of the World Economic Forum suddenly found themselves researching its history. Online communities formed around shared suspicion. Forum members found clips of Schwab discussing digital identity systems and artificial intelligence. They shared screenshots of corporate partnerships with government agencies. Each piece of evidence fed growing distrust. The boundary between reasonable concern and wild speculation began to blur. Valid questions about corporate influence mixed with claims of global control schemes. Academic researchers struggle to separate documented facts from internet theories. Major news outlets tried to provide balance, but their efforts often backfired. When journalists attempted to debunk the most extreme claims, skeptics accused them of being part of the cover-up. The media's credibility, already weakened by years of polarization, crumbled further. Forum attendees seemed unaware of the storm brewing outside their mountain retreat. They continued their panels on stakeholder capitalism and sustainable development, speaking in the measured tones of policy experts. Meanwhile, millions watched their live streams with mounting anxiety. The disconnect was striking. Inside the conference halls, delegates discussed technical solutions to complex problems. Outside, citizens interpreted these same discussions as evidence of a coordinated takeover. The language of global governance, filtered through screens and speculation, transformed into something far more sinister. What had begun as economic policy debates evolved into a cultural phenomenon. The Great Reset became a symbol, a catch-all term for fears about lost autonomy and concentrated power. The more officials tried to explain their intentions, the deeper public suspicion grew. The truth lay somewhere between official statements and popular theories, hidden in the complex reality of how modern power actually operates. Power, panic, and the persistence of doubt. 2023 to present. The morning of January 1st, 2023 brought no dramatic announcements. No secret meetings were exposed. No mysterious documents leaked from hidden vaults. Yet millions of people around the world woke up more convinced than ever that powerful forces were reshaping their lives without their consent. Social media feeds buzzed with fragments of truth mixed with wild speculation. A climate policy in Germany became evidence of global control. A digital currency pilot program in China sparked fears of financial surveillance everywhere. Each real development fed a growing narrative that felt both impossible to prove and impossible to ignore. Sarah Chen, a policy researcher in Brussels, noticed something strange in her work. Government officials spoke openly about sustainable development goals. They published detailed reports about economic reforms. They held public meetings about new technologies. Everything seemed transparent, yet trust kept falling. "It's like we're telling people exactly what we're doing," she confided to a colleague over coffee. But the more we explain, the more suspicious they become. The paradox deepened with each passing month. the United Nations published thousands of pages about their sustainability frameworks. The World Economic Forum live-streamed their discussions. Government databases overflowed with policy documents. Information had never been more available, but availability did not equal clarity. Technical language filled with acronyms created barriers. Complex international agreements spanned hundreds of pages. Economic theories required advanced degrees to understand. The very transparency meant to build trust instead created confusion. Meanwhile, simplified explanations spread like wildfire across digital platforms. Complex policies became sinister plots in viral videos. Nuanced debates transformed into stark warnings about freedom versus control. Truth became whatever version people found first. Dr. Michael Torres, who had studied international cooperation for 20 years, watched the phenomenon with fascination and concern. "We're witnessing something new," he observed. "People have access to more information than ever before, but they trust official sources less than ever before." The mystery was not hidden in secret documents or classified meetings. It lived in the gap between what governments said they were doing and what people believed they were really doing. Every policy announcement created new questions. Every official explanation sparked deeper suspicions. As 2024 approached, one truth remained clear. The future would be shaped not just by what leaders decided in conference rooms, but by what ordinary people believed was really happening behind closed doors. The greatest conspiracy might be the breakdown of trust itself.